What's the coolest thing from Star Wars? Clone Troopers? Well, yes, that's the correct answer. But what's the second coolest? That's a tough question. There's a lot of cool things in Star Wars. OT purists would say a certain bounty hunter is the coolest, despite the fact that he did very little, but people still soy-boyed over him. In terms of looks, the Emperor's Royal Guard was a good candidate. From the perspective of the films, the Royal Guards have an extremely limited role, especially since Palpatine dismissed them in Return of the Jedi's climax, leading to him losing his life. A grave mistake. We don't know all that much about the Emperor's Royal Guards, and a lot of the external material actually added to it. The fact that they'd stand guard for hours upon hours in complete stillness and were some of the best fighters the Empire had to offer. The fact that their armor was made from Beskar, and pretty much none of them spoke. Sounds like an interesting premise for a story, right? That's exactly what writers Mike Richardson and Randy Stradley thought. And I agree with the idea on premise alone. Why not make a story that expands on the Emperor's Royal Guards? Show us where they came from, what they did, and so on and so forth. Crimson Empire is certainly an underrated storyline. Dark Empire was underrated in the sense that people hated on it unfairly without even reading it. Crimson Empire is underrated in the sense that people don't seem to know all that much about it, other than it has something to do with the Royal Guards. And that's pretty much all I knew before I opted to read it. I'm so glad I did though. As a story that takes place during the later stages of the Galactic Civil War, it touches on some new aspects of the war. Exploring the Emperor's Royal Guard without an Emperor is what sold me into this series. This comic takes place right after the Emperor's final death on Onderon in Dark Empire. I've already written a review for Dark Empire, which is the direct predecessor to Crimson Empire. The two stories are very closely connected, and it adds more context to the events of Dark Empire. This is the story that first and foremost made the Emperor's Royal Guards cool, and made them much more than simple background extras in a movie. Top that up with Revenge of the Sith, with Yoda just walking in and knocking out two of them with the Force. It's almost like that bounty hunter I mentioned earlier, but less embarrassing because the Royal Guard actually had the believable potential to be cool in external material, while the former did not. Today, let's take a deep dive into Crimson Empire and see how much a bull is provoked by it. Now, before we talk about the story itself, I just want to mention that I'm going off the Star Wars Legends Epic Collection Volume 6 issues, which includes the mainline entries of the Crimson Empire trilogy, as well as spin-offs included in the Bounty Hunter series and Dark Horse extra panels. All of these directly relate to Crimson Empire, and thus I consider them part of the series. It's also compiled all the issues in chronological order, so it's a great reference for all these issues, and that's what I'll be basing this review off of. Also, another thing, I believe Crimson Empire is one of the best titles for a Star Wars comic. It's a perfect description of the vibe you're gonna get, but it rolls off the tongue better than anything else. The front cover clearly shows that it's gonna be about the Emperor's Royal Guards. It's a cool name for a cool series about the cool Royal Guards. One of the best names for a Star Wars series all around. So as I said before, Crimson Empire takes place in the direct aftermath of Dark Empire, another series that I adore. Palpatine is gone and dead forever, and in the wake of his final death, a ruling council, led by one Khan or Jax, intends to seize the Imperial throne for himself. It's revealed that Palpatine's physician in Dark Empire was actually a saboteur, who helped accelerate the Emperor's death, and this led to his defeat. So that's why Empire's End was only 2 issues long, as the Emperor's death was a form of sabotage. Despite this, there is still a threat to Khan or Jax's ascension to Emperor. In other words, there's only one man who can stop him, and that's Kir Kanos, the protagonist of this storyline. Kanos is presented as a mysterious man with expert fighting tendencies. On the planet of Fader, he bribes a docking port guard and enters an Imperial bar, listening in on a conversation concerning Khan or Jax. Right off the bat, I'm going to praise the art style. It suits this storyline. Dark Empire was extremely effective, but I think Crimson Empire works for its tone too. As we go along in this review, we'll see that Crimson Empire is the forgotten sequel to Dark Empire. I suspect it's because the story doesn't have the same stakes or idea as Dark Empire. I'll talk about this as the review goes on. The hooded Kanos eavesdrops on the Imperial speaking about Jax, and how he's actually a good fit for a replacement to the deluded Palpatine. I gotta appreciate the detail from picking up from Dark Empire's aftermath. Despite being the founder of the Empire, Palpatine's antics in Dark Empire made his own followers believe he was no longer capable of running the Empire. And toppled with the prequel trilogy, it shows how the mighty have fallen. It was a common theme of Dark Empire that translates to this story as well. The chatting Imperials catch on to Kanos listening in, and they decide to pick a fight with them. Kanos, to showcase his personality, tries to defuse everything, and recommends that they all leave each other alone, but immediately kicks the Imperials' asses when it turns out peace isn't in the cards. Our first impressions of Kanos is that he's not one to be fucked with. In the first few pages, it's easy to piece together that he's one of the Emperor's royal guards, given his prowess and whatnot. It's a superior version on how they introduce Mando, or the Bad Batch. It's played straight and serious, and there isn't anything that detracts from that. After beating some stormtroopers outside, an old haggish man offers to help him and bring him to a safe house, and Kanos reluctantly accepts his help. Something about this storyline is how appearances sell everything. Kanos in hooded robes sold him as a mysterious dude, and in the very next scene, we're introduced to Khan or Jax, who sees Kanos as a threat, and he makes that very clear to his underlings. He values Kanos enough that he orders his goons to double the search for Kanos, and emphasizes that for as long as he lives, he poses a threat to the would-be Crimson Empire.
He said it! He said it!
Khan or Jax is a compelling villain. He has personal ties to the protagonist and is cold and imposing. But keep in mind that Jax is quite short-lived as a villain. This is exactly where it's revealed that he was the mastermind behind Palpatine's death. The Emperor's physician, as mentioned earlier, was bribed to sabotage Palpatine, and it resulted in his death in Dark Empire. But our royal guard who accompanied Palpatine to Onderon overheard this, and now carried vital information that could ruin Jax's ascension to Emperor, and informs the other remaining royal guards. There are still those loyal to the legacy of Palpatine, no matter how crazy he got at the end. Even though Khan or Jax conspired to kill the most evil man in the galaxy, it was ultimately for selfish reasons. And he shows how treacherous he is. He's a power-hungry opportunist, and is after Kanos because he could expose him. He demonstrates his anger on an orb which shatters, due to his use in the Force, and warns his general not to fail him again. And they show the dude sweating hard after this meeting. Back on Fedor, the haggish man, who introduced himself to Kanos as Tam Merkin, escorts Kanos to a safe house. Merkin tells him to wait while he gets his friends, and Kanos takes down his hood, and we get our first good look at him, not smiling in the slightest. He thinks to himself that despite the rough outline of the safe house, it was a palace compared to the training grounds of Yin Kor. And the comics takes the opportunity to present us with a flashback. Clever. Yin Kor is a planet that also appeared in the Acts of War comic that was set some years before the Phantom Menace. The prequel era comics are a good story for another time. But point is, Yin Kor, in by the events of the flashback, has had the Empire genocide the people of this world, and it is now a training guard for potential recruits for the Emperor's Royal Guard. And they show us in the most PG-13 way they can that Royal Guard training is brutal, and it's a privilege to even make it out alive. Palpatine wanted the best of the best of the best. It's shown that the trainees are picked from top squads in the Empire, and trained here in the chance they'll become royal guards. In the flashback, Kanos is still a man with morals, and is shown to be a casual acquaintance with Khan or Jax. You could even infer that they're friends. The trainees line up in the presence of the Emperor, accompanied by Darth Vader. What Vader does next is kinda questionable though. He gets the best student, Bird Dana, to step forward and fight him one-on-one, and then kills him, and uses it to make a point how none of them are yet fit to serve the Emperor. Yeah, the villain kills his own men cliché, and to a promising student no less. I get that you're supposed to demoralize the trainees and indoctrinate them into believing that nothing except the Emperor matters. As I've said, there's other, better ways to do that. So that's a criticism I have here. They probably just wanted to emphasize the brutality of it all for dramatic effect. Kanos awakens to the sound of the Imperials about to find him in the safe house. The general prioritizes capturing Kanos above all else, and this is the cliffhanger to the first issue. And already there's a lot to unpack. It effectively set itself up as a sequel to Dark Empire. And I like the presentation on how drawn out the Galactic Civil War is, with changing circumstances. Just when it looks like there will be a new emperor to take charge, he's dethroned before he could even be throned in the first place. As such, in the next issue, we see firsthand the strict manhunt for Kanos. Merkin delivers Kanos to a rebel cell on Phaedor, and it's here where we're introduced to Mira Sin, our female lead, who is shown as the leader of the rebel cell, and also patriotic to the New Republic, and takes a special interest in Kanos. Meanwhile, Carnor Jax is fed up with the incompetence of his underlings, and is going to set out to confront Kanos himself. He will travel to Phaedor to confront him. Tem Merkin, it seems, is also a rat, as he gives information to the Empire on the fugitives' location, leading them to the rebel base. And it's pretty much a fact here that Merkin is playing both sides to increase his wealth, given he was paid by the New Republic agents, and now he's going to the Empire for additional payment.
So uncivilized.
Anyways, upon arriving to the base, Mirith puts her faith in Kanos despite hardly knowing him, and despite the protests of one of her underlings, it's here where Kanos and Mirith have their first conversation. Kanos reveals that he sees Carnor Jackson as ruling council as traitors, and is dead set on killing all of them. One of my favourite lines from him is when Mirith asks if he's betrayed the Empire, and Kanos responds that he's never betrayed anyone. Mirith reveals that her backstory is that she was to marry a farmer, but the Imperials showed up and killed him, and now she dedicates her life to the New Republic. Meanwhile, Carnor Jax finds out about the unauthorized attack on Kanos and the rebels, and is pissed. And it's here where Kanos shows his true worth. Merkin misdirects the rebels again, and makes the Trandoshan Sadit believe that Kanos led the rebels into a trap. Damn snitch. Anyways, one of Mirith's underlings, Massimo, distrusts Kanos and wants him out of the base before he causes trouble. But Mirith springs to his defense, and she reminds Kanos of dialogue of his final test on Yinkor years ago. In the flashback, both Kanos and Carnor Jax have made it to the final stage of their training. Mutually amongst them are Lemic Tuck and Alum Frost. The trainer leads them in to see the Emperor for their final test. Kanos and Tuck enter after Jax and Frost to meet their final test. And as one probably pieced together, the two are forced to fight each other. Reluctantly, they draw their weapons and fight for the position of the Royal Guard. I presume this is meant to establish how the Royal Guard's loyalty is not even to each other even, it's only to the Emperor. Kanos kills Tok and is immediately remorseful, but Darth Vader dismisses his guilt, and Kanos is told he will serve the Emperor well, and this completely changes Kanos. His only goal in life is to serve the Emperor, nothing else. It's also here where we see how Kanos got his scar. It was inflicted by Vader after he became an official Royal Guard as his final lesson, that he is weak compared to the power of the dark side. Back in the present, the rebel base is attacked by the Empire, and amongst all this, Kanos gears up in his Royal Guard armor, with the intent of helping the rebels against Jax's forces, thus ending issue 2. The rebels slowly realize this and assist him in the fight. We see Kanos shatter 2 stormtrooper helmets during battle, and it's only implied what damage that could have been. Despite that, Kanos takes on all the Imperials like a one-man army. His reflexes and abilities are unmatched, and the comic does a great job painting a picture. For me personally, I'm not the best at visualizing comic book action, but this was an exception. I can more easily tell that Kanos swung or blasted. Even when a TIE Interceptor tries to take Kanos and the rebels down, he shoots the pilot in the cockpit with a blaster pistol with supreme accuracy, and it causes him crashing down. The Imperials are forced to retreat, and the one who disobeyed Jax is sweating bullets on what he will do now that disobeying his orders didn't pan out. He's even so intimidated by the sight of Kanos that he temporarily loses focus on a fellow officer who was speaking to him. The rebels, especially Mirith, thank him for his heroics, but upon taking off his helmet, Kanos tells him that he is no hero. The Imperials attacked the base to capture him, and he simply did what he did to prevent that. He shows that his only goal is to serve out justice for the Emperor. Merkin also shows up, still hiding his role as an opportunistic double agent, and Kanos explains that after the death of the Emperor, all the surviving Royal Guards gathered on their training ground on Yinkor. There were few Royal Guards left after the Galaxy Gun destroyed the planet Biss, or on the Eclipse flagship. And upon mourning the Emperor, the traitorous Khan Jax ambushed them with his Imperial forces, killing all of his fellow guards. When it was only him and another guard named Kyle Hanad left, they knew that they were outmatched, and there wasn't enough time. So they flipped a coin and let fate decide which one of them would fulfill vengeance for the Emperor. Hanad was the one who in Emperor Royal Guard terms got the easy way out, and fended off Jax's Imperial forces long enough for Kanos to escape, before he was inevitably killed. Now Kanos stands as the final Royal Guard alive, the others dead, and in the case of Khan Jax, he's a traitor and thus could not count as one. So yeah, this is done to emphasize the serious talent of Kanos, as his only equal is Khan Jax, who was given the same training as a Royal Guard, and then some. Anyways, Kanos still has his allegiance to the Emperor. He ditches the rebels and intends to get back to his ship, telling Mirith and the rebels to do the same. The incompetent Imperial commander, meanwhile, is told that Kanos came in on a ship, and he tries to make sure that he seizes his last opportunity to take Kanos down, with Khan Jax arriving in the system personally, and he is pissed that Kanos is close to getting away. He shatters another sphere to emphasize that, serving as the cliffhanger to issue 3. Now we're on to issue 4, and holy shit, is that Ryan Reynolds? Damn, that's a spitting image if I've ever seen it. Would Ryan Reynolds be good as Kir Kanos? Probably not. From what I've seen, he usually plays more jokey characters like Deadpool.
I was always appalled by the blatant sexism in the group's name. X-Men? Men?
And I can't imagine him doing a role without at least smirking once. That's the thing. Kanos is like the most serious motherfucker, beating out even pre-TCW Quinlan Voss. With that being said, however, let's get on to the next issue. This issue marks the arrival of Khan Jax of Fedor. The rebels by now have figured out that Merkin is a snitch playing both sides for his own benefit. The rebels catch him feeding information to Khan Jax, and upon returning to his safe house, he is confronted by the rebels, and his treachery is put to an end. Mirith then disguises herself as Kanos with the hood and such, and since she didn't have the same skills, she's easily captured. But when they figure out that she's not Kanos, she's chained up and interrogated for the location of Kanos. It's surprising that Kanos hasn't shown up for a good portion of this issue. This shows that he's got some supreme stealth skills. Khan Jax does extract the information he wants from Mirith though. Mirith at first lies that he's gone over to the mountains, but due to Jax's training in the Force, he sees through this deception. And she spills the beans that he's actually headed to Yinkor, and Jax can tell that she's telling the truth instantly. His underling presumes that she's lying, but Jax knows Kanos all too well to know that of course Kanos would go there. He gets his ship prepped for hyperspace, and in a rare display of honor, he actually lets Mirith go, despite the fact that she lied to him. Mirith immediately goes to Sadit and warns him about Jax's planned attack on rebels across Fedor. Despite sparing her life, he still intended to wipe out the rebels. When Jax jumps into hyperspace, he orders the ship he's leaving behind to turn the rebel base into a crater. But before the attack can commence, a new Republic fleet shows up after Jax has left the system. A super Star Destroyer aligned with the Republic shows up, under the command of Wedge Antilles, and they overwhelm the Imperials at Fedor. Meanwhile, Khan Jax's ship in the Yinkor system takes in Kanos' ship through a tractor beam while Jax goes down to the surface. Kanos' ship turns out to be a decoy, and well, Jax's ship goes full Michael Bay. So Khan Jax has lost his flagship, the the Emperor's revenge. But with his remaining Imperial forces, he sets down the old training academy. I'd like to say here that the build-up was great. Jax never underestimated the threat Kanos posed, and is going at every length to stop him. And even though he's been outsmarted with his flagship destroyed, he still intends to wipe Kanos out. The personal connection between Jax and Kanos really intensifies the conflict too. And now we're going to end where it all began. He orders his remaining forces to spread out and gets his elite unit to find Kanos, warning them the threat Kanos represents. Unsurprisingly, despite having the best unit accompany him, Kanos proceeds to wreck all of them with an ambush. And it's expertly set up where now it's just him and Khan or Jax. It's personal. And Kanos intends to avenge his Emperor. Man, now that I think about it, this is almost Battlefront 2 EA without the false advertising. I think I should also mention that Mirith and Sadit decide to go after Kanos, and here, it's now what at the time would be considered the climax. Obviously, we've got 2 sequels after this, but at the time, this was the end. In the next issue, it focuses wholly on Kanos and Jax's confrontation. They clash swords with each other, and Jax taunts Kanos by stating that he was always his better during training, and now he has the power of the Force on his side. As this happens, Mirith and Sadit show up, and the incompetent obese Imperial officer practically flees. Another interesting thing about Khan or Jax even on the last issue is that he offers Kanos the chance to join him, with promises of power on the council he created. Kanos deflects the offer by saying that he and his council are nothing more than opportunists and thieves. Khan or Jax even responds with, and I quote, "Let the past go. Palpatine is dead." And that, my friends, is how context changes the reaction. When I saw that line, I was thinking about The Last Jedi's dreadful let the past die bullshit, spoken by a character who does not adhere to this belief in the slightest. During the last movie, that movie, or the movie after it. Khan or Jax as a character through his actions and character proves he fully believes what he's doing is fine. He betrayed the Emperor, but it doesn't matter to him after the fact, because now the Emperor's gone. It also isn't a wholly stupid line that tells Kanos to shut out the past entirely, because Jax knows Kanos in the past, and knows the value he could serve in his empire. But at the same time, Kanos is still around in the present. Do you see why one works and the other doesn't? The Last Jedi was deliberately set up for a negative reaction, exactly like The Last of Us Part 2. So Kanos and Jax continue their fight, but upon Mirith and Sadit's arrival, they demand Kanos spare Jax, as the New Republic needs him alive. But we see right here that Kanos has no intention of assisting his allies by circumstance. He mortally wounds Jax, and announces that due to the part he played in the Emperor's final death, he hereby condemns them to death. And yep, that's the end of Khan or Jax. However, Kanos also accidentally kills Sadit, who gets in the way after he just executed the traitor. He then unmasks Jax as he is not fit to wear the Royal Guard uniform. Mirith, clearly upset because he executed Jax when the New Republic needed him, and committed manslaughter on Sadit, is asked why, to which Kanos responds that he didn't ask for help, and that they only had a common enemy. Otherwise, they are enemies. Kanos apologizes for Sadit's accidental death, but affirms that there are others to hunt down. He marches off, disappearing dramatically, and when Mirith's allies show up, Mirith explains everything that happened after she gives Sadit a proper burial, and swears that she will execute Kanos for his misdeeds. And that was Crimson Empire. So yeah, it's got a different feel to Dark Empire, but it's still pretty fantastic. Kanos is introduced as a top-tier warrior with an alternate motivation. As the sole surviving Imperial Royal Guard after Dark Empire, he was determined to serve justice for the Emperor, and it shows us the fanatical loyalty to the Emperor. Any Royal Guards left after the Emperor's return were wiped out. And now Kanos stands out as the last of his kind, now that he's executed Khan or Jax for his crimes. Kir Kanos as the protagonist is more of an anti-hero than anything. Despite being the first in a trilogy, Crimson Empire 1 has a beginning, middle, and end. And a sequel pretty much popped up because Crimson Empire did well enough. Crimson Empire may not be as well known as other Star Wars comics, but it exists nonetheless. After the success of Crimson Empire, a sequel was greenlit, dubbed Crimson Empire 2, Council of Blood, which is an awesome title. When we left off, the next natural place for this story to go was the ruling council Kano Jack set up. However, there was a prelude comic release beforehand. Since I'm basing this video off of the Star Wars Epic Collection compilations, I'm going to discuss this one-off comic, titled Star Wars The Bounty Hunters Keenix Kill, How the Mighty Have Fallen. From what I understand, it was a little prelude to Council of Blood to let us know what Kanos, under the titular alias, has been doing. Since this is a one-off, it's a pretty contained one-off story that serves as a useful prelude to the direct sequel to Crimson Empire. I mean, from what I've seen, Jedi Battle Scars is perhaps the worst prelude I've ever seen. You can't get any worse than that, especially for a sequel to a video game that's actually worth a shit in a franchise on the decline. Anyways, we're introduced to Kanos sometime after Crimson Empire, serving as a bounty hunter, one with a bounty on his own head.
Ironic.
Anyways, Kanos has adopted the alias Keenix Kill, with the same initials as his actual name, which I guess in Star Wars, everyone is terrible at adopting aliases, especially Obi-Wan Kenobi. With that being said, however, Kanos is on a mission to hamper the Crimson Empire however he can, and that includes the nephew of a guy on the council. Is it just me, or is it supposed to be symbolic of the name Council of Blood? I don't know. That's just an observation I picked up. Kanos now has the ultimate tactic for avoiding bounty hunters, becoming one himself. The one-off comic has Kanos as a bounty hunter on a mission to target the nephew, the governor of Barramora, simply referred to as Boss Bangia, in which Kanos comes by in disguise, proves his worth as a bounty hunter by doing such an accurate shot, and leaking the location of Kir Kanos. Bangia, not realizing he's standing in front of him, gives him a group of bounty hunters to help Keenix Kill hunt down Kanos. But upon arriving outside the town, Kanos takes out all the bounty hunters in some nice comic book action, and then returns to Bangia, who now defenseless, Kanos proceeds to proclaim a traitor and executes him on the spot with no mercy. Yeah, so Kanos' sense of justice is incredibly far-reaching. His mission in life now is to execute everyone on the Council of Blood. But as we'll soon see in the mainline sequel, it kind of feels like the writers ran out of ideas for villains that could top Khan or Jax. Now I know George Lucas was kind of guilty of the same thing when he rehashed a bigger, better Death Star, because he struggled to come up with a threat bigger than the first Death Star. I think there should have been more set up for the second Death Star in Empire Strikes Back, but on the upside, you gotta remember that A New Hope was made without the guarantee of sequels. George said that you should go into a story expecting it to be a total failure, and not expecting to just make 50 sequels in a multi-gazillion dollar franchise. I think the same is true here. Khan or Jax had the most potential as a villain, but the thing is that he was killed off at the end of Crimson Empire 1. But the writers got stuck, and couldn't come up with a villain that topped or matched him. You'll see what I mean when we get into Council of Blood. So in Council of Blood, our opening scene shows us a ship commanded by Michael Jordan. Yeah, he's Michael Jordan. That's what he looks like. I presume after the events of Space Jam, which was released 2 years before this comic, Michael Jordan inherited the Monstars spaceship or whatever, and decided to travel to the Star Wars galaxy under the name Captain Former. And now he's being boarded by pirates. Michael Jordan decides to surrender to the darn pirates, and we're shown that he sweats harder than the matches he does for the Chicago Bulls. Keep in mind, my only context for Michael Jordan is literally only Space Jam and word of mouth about the NBA. Our introduction to the Pirates is pretty good. We see that the Gamorrean of the group instantly smashes Jordan's droid to bits, and the leader tells Jordan that he hates droids. Cut to the planet Ord Cantrell, which sounds pretty similar to Ord Mantell, so I presume it was made by the same people in universe. Point is, this is the world of the Crimson Empire Council, dealing with the after effects of Khan or Jax's death. I think it was a mistake killing the top dog early when this became a trilogy. We see that the Crimson Council is in disarray almost. We meet Fina Diasta, who will be important for later, the daughter of an Imperial Baron who stood down due to illness. We meet the eventual main villain too, Xandal Carithis. I'll get to him later. But the main guy focus is Burr Knowles, who upon going to sleep for the night, finds a device on the floor, and upon activating it, is met with the cruelest prank ever, an explosion, brought to you by Michael Bay.
Awesome barbecue, awesome pull.
Anyways, he's dead right off the bat, indicating that someone is picking off the Council of Blood. Now, a reason I wish Khan or Jack stuck around was because he really held the Crimson Empire together. And the conflict isn't as strong without strong villains. Also, the fact that the follow-up villains isn't as strong as Jack's at that. But again, we'll get to that. So with that being said, we cut to the planet Genon, in which we introduce our secondary antagonist, Grappa the Hutt. Grappa is like any Hutt, really, being known for cruelty and ruthlessness. Having connections to the Black Sun, Grappa is shown throwing in an alien to be killed personally, which is a small step up from Jabba. That Grappa does some of his executions personally, rather than just pressing a trap door. I hear the Hutts are often underestimated physically, but they are in fact very strong and resilient. Grappa is informed that a woman wishes to see him, and in comes Mira Sin, offering her services in exchange for Grappa's intel to help locate a certain someone. You at first assume it's Kir Kanos, but nope, it's actually someone else. What a way to subvert my expectations. Anyways, after the death of Knowles, the council panics even further, and guesses that someone with inside knowledge must have killed him. Kanos is suspected, but isn't confirmed as the assassin. Later that day, since Knowles took control of the council, they appoint a new leader, who ends up being Xandel Carivis. Now here I wanted to talk about Carivis. He indulges the hateable villain trope. While a lot of villains in Star Wars, especially in the films, have charm to them, or do something as villains that make you enjoy them, I guess villains designed to be hated are a rarity. Yeah, we all hate Kylo Ren, or Reva, but they weren't intended to be hated the way the incompetent writers designed them. I've been looking at creative writing videos, and I saw a guy discussing the difference between likable and hateable villains. He explains that likable villains such as Nolan vs. Joker or Hans Gruber have personality and style, and that they're a huge highlight of the story, and people enjoy when they show up, because while they challenge the hero, they do it in a way where they truly encourage the hero to rise above them. Hans Gruber, for example, might have the advantage over John McClane, but he's fully prepared for the battle, and adapts quickly to McClane. He's truly someone who puts some hard work in, even if it's something villainous. He also kills the unlikable Ellis, who was all over hitting on McClane's wife and was generally annoying. In writing, it's a subconscious way of making you like Hans more, because he put a douchey character in his place, or in this case, got rid of them. Don't tell me you subconsciously cheered at that. Not to mention that he also has skills like speaking multiple languages, and he's got touches that make him cool. In Star Wars, there's a lot of villains like that. Palpatine is the prime example, worked hard to manipulate the whole galaxy, was ultra powerful naturally, managed to take over the Republic and turn it into the Empire, and swayed the most powerful Force user in existence to join him. Ian McDiarmid nailed the whole persona of Palpatine. He was clever and resourceful despite being pure evil. That's why he became a likable villain, especially in the prequel trilogy. Now when it comes to hateable villains, I learned that they are commonly terrible presences on screen, but they can also assist certain stories. They probably aren't as common as likable villains, or at least villains that try to be likable but fail because the writers suck, but hateable villains are typically characters who are scumbags, have no charisma on screen, do bad things for the sake of it, don't earn anything, and with villains like this, their stories usually end with a satisfying punishment for all the shit they've done. There are many examples I could choose, but I figured I should go with Jang Duk-soo from Squid Game. If you didn't already know, I have a video about Squid Game Season 1 planned when the second season's full trailer comes out, being one of the few non-commission, non-Star Wars stuff I'm doing, so I feel it's perfect to talk about it. Jang in particular is perhaps so hated that the actor struggled with fans after the fact. He played the part too well. But the point is that Jang is a character who ends up in the Squid Game like everyone else. The reason he's there is because he owes money to a Korean mafia boss, being a violent criminal himself, unlike normal people who just have debts to pay off for understandable reasons. In the first episode, he insults the North Korean girl because she comes from Kim Fatty III's domain. I hope you know which country I'm talking about. And upon returning to the games after being given no choice, he basically makes an alliance with only the stronger guys who survived the first game. He beats a guy to death in between game 2 and 3 after stealing his food and drink. He seizes the opportunity in the night riot to kill whoever he can, and he comes to betray the woman who helped him in game 2 come the preparation for game 3. When it's revealed that game 3 is tug of war and the participants will be thinned in half, he gleefully and sadistically laughs as the other team fall to their deaths, showing no remorse whatsoever, and even makes a remark to the protagonist team that he's bummed out that he couldn't kill them himself. Come the fourth game, when realizing he'll have to compete against his partner, being one of his goons, he shows no sorrow for having to do so, and in fact cheers sadistically when he beats his former goon at marbles. Then in the fifth game, being glass stepping stones, he picks a middle position but stops when he's next up in line, and selfishly demands that anyone who wants to proceed go before him, not after. This is eventually where he gets his comeuppance, where the woman that he betrayed volunteers to move forward, but instead grips him with her arms. Jang, being a coward, pleads for her to let go, but of course she knows better than to listen, and kills him in a murder-suicide at that moment, where everyone was like,
Another happy landing.
and how just too. He totally deserved it. And on top of that, the moment before he died was oh so satisfying.
You see, in their last moments, people show you who they really are.
So how it relates to this video is that Xandel Charybdis is one of the rare hateable villains I've seen so far. While Colonel Jax is a traitor and opportunist, he still had genuine abilities and power. And he also offers Kanos a chance to join him, showing that he had nothing against him. He's also competent and he gets things done. He was closer to a likable villain in this case, but Charybdis is nothing of the sort. All of Jax's negative traits apply here, but on top of that, he's a slimy, cowardly, spineless, and lazy guy. I mean, look at the size of him. He's one burger away from type 2 diabetes. He doesn't earn anything, and in fact, after he's appointed, we see that he's being influenced by a mysterious new character, Nominor. So that shows that he needed hand-holding in order to get his power. He was basically leader of the Crimson Council by circumstance, and not out of any real skill. His appearance, persona, and actions make him a pretty hateable villain indeed. Not exactly a candidate for a fan-favorite character. Cutting back to Grappa the Hutt, the pirates inform Grappa on the intel they extracted from Michael Jordan, in which they proceed to take him away. Then Kir Kanos, under the alias of Kenix Kills, enters the story again. As a bounty hunter, he's being, quote, hired to do some stuff for Grappa the Hutt, and is given a room in Grappa's palace. He completely jams Grappa's cameras, so he can't even find out who he is when he takes off his helmet. Yeah, so that's the first issue of Crimson Empire 2. And would you look at that, I've already spoken about so much. Come the second issue, Kanos is sent on a job by Grappa, in which he shows his peak combat skills when he's refused an audience with Terrence Snill. Not a scratch. Kanos is pretty untouchable by this point, but I wouldn't exactly call him a Larry Stu. The reason why is his key weakness, that being his undying loyalty to Palpatine posthumously, which heavily clouds his decisions. Fighting for justice on behalf of the dead is his main distraction. It's his new goal in life, to punish those responsible for the Emperor's death. So to sum it up, his weakness is his fixation. Years of unconditional, brutal training made him the ultimate weapon. But without Palpatine, he only has one goal, and has no room to stop for anything. Kanos is also shown to have a capacity for other things later on, although his loyalty to Palpatine is ever so strong. Anyways, back to the Council. Admiral Bangier is found dead by stabbing, in which a dagger is left behind. The council continues to be picked off. We then cut to Grappa meeting up with Black Sun crime lords, in which it's revealed that Fina Diesta was kidnapped and replaced by a clone to replace her on the council as a spy. Damn, cloning's one hell of a thing, ain't it? I guess having Spartai clones at this point would make for an increase in this sort of stuff. I mean, look at how carried away Palpatine got with clones. Anyways, back to the Crimson Council, Everyone's pointing fingers.
You're pointing at me right now as you say that.
You're
Look
pointing.
at you.
I'm
Look
just
at your
pointing at
finger.
your pointing,
Look at your
which
finger
is
right
different
now.
than
What is
normal
it doing?
pointing.
You are pointing.
You
at
haven't
me.
seen
You're
pointing
accusing
until I
me
get
of
through with you,
pointing
and then
while
you'll-
It's almost exactly like Plinkett's interpretation of the Phantom Menace pitch meeting. Damn, if only Plinkett wasn't a filthy casual. Maybe I should make a fake Plinkett review of something in the expanded universe. Anyways, people are pointing fingers. One guy accuses the aliens on the council of being the conspirators, given those assassinated were human. The Crimson Council then talks about how the symbol left behind by the assassin ties everything back to Kir Kanos. And Xandel exclaims that he'll put a bounty on his head so big that no one will be able to resist it. Fina's clone challenges Xandel's leadership, given how security on the two were incredibly lax. And I love what I'm about to say, but she calls for a vote of no confidence in Xandel Carivus, less than a year before the Phantom Menace came out. It's worth noting that it's not called by name a vote of no confidence, but it's exactly the same thing. However, Xandel agrees to a vote, and the results end up in his favor. He's still leader of the Crimson Empire. Xandel goes to vent at Nominor. Knowing that Fina will challenge his power to the bitter end, Nominor responds that there will have to be another assassination. Now we know who the assassin is. We cut back to Grappa punishing a dude harshly, and says that he'll allow him to leave, although not in one piece. He'll get one of his arms severed. The dude is terrified, but Grappa simply responds,
I missed the part where that's my problem.
Anyways, Kanos comes in bringing Terrence Snill, who of course Grappa punishes. Common theme with hot characters. Grappa wishes to reward Kanos in disguise with food and women and shit, but he declines. Although shortly after, he's interrupted by a transmission from who else but Nominor. And that's the cliffhanger for issue 2, as Kanos sees the image of the mysterious dude. So come issue 3, the pirates board another starship. Enough said there. Kanos meanwhile is testing his skills against random animals that Grappa has in his palace. Enough said again. The next important thing that happens is Xandel learning that General Imadet has been murdered, in which Xandel increases security on himself, and upon speaking to Nominor, he reveals that this assassination was not planned. Xandel starts sweating and pleads for Nom to find a solution, but Nom is unfazed and tells him to continue with the plan. And he even smacks Xandel hard when he touches him. So anyways, we cut back to Grappa the Hutt speaking to the Xanabar, cannibalistic mercenaries that look like blue skeletons. Grappa receives a new revelation when Massimo, one of the soldiers under Sin's command, informs Grappa that Sin is spying on him. Massimo was in the previous story, and he showed a great distrust of Kanos and questioned Mirith's choice. So I totally buy that eventually he'd be fed up with her and try to rat her out. Cut back to the Crimson Council, in which Xandel shows how low he can go by proceeding to ban the aliens on the council from sharing power. Yeah, so on top of being an obese slob, he's also racist. Perfect. Either that, or he was looking for an excuse to secure more power. He also smugly declares Fina a traitor and has her arrested for treason, although still unaware that she's a clone. I do have to say that Xandel Carivus really shines as a hateable villain. No charisma, doesn't earn anything, and unpleasant to look at. I hate him too much, and that's a compliment since I suppose it's by design. Mirith meanwhile breaks into the original Fina's cell, and it's revealed here that she knows her. Trying to jog the drugged up Fina back to memory, she explains that her deceased husband and Fina's dad did business deals together. When a guard catches Mirith red-handed, the hooded Kanos ambushes the guard and bails them both out, although Mirith doesn't make it very far, as she's confronted by Grappa based on the intel by Massimo, and decides to send both her and Massimo to the Xanabars to be eaten. Yeah, that's right. He's betraying Massimo, who in turn betrayed Mirith.
Betrayal.
It's pretty in character for Grappa, and he even reasons that Massimo, if he was willing to betray his superior, would eventually betray him as well. So yeah, they're both to be eaten. Grappa also learns from one of his partners, who he ironically kills afterwards, is also a secret language anagram for Kir Kanos, but they can't find him in his room. His ship, though, is still in the palace. I object to Grappa killing one of his own men, and for a petty reason. I hate the villain kills his own men cliche. In the next and last panel of the issue though, we see that Kanos escaped on a different ship, and he's headed for Zoe, the Xanabar homeworld, presumably to save Mirith. And yep, come the next issue, he heads to the homeworld, just like he said he would. Grappa meanwhile contacts the Black Sun leader Eula Sib, having made the mistake of killing the associate in the last issue. Has to prop him up as if he's alive. You can tell that Grappa's arrogance has led him into making a lethal mistake. Wonder if that'll come back to bite him in the arse, or whatever the hard equivalent is. I'm not very interested in learning their anatomy. Anyways, Kanos is an absolute stealth master. He takes a robe off one of the Xanabars and proceeds to locate Mirith, frees her quickly until they're spotted by the Xanabar, and they opt to use their legs to escape. They get into the ship, which as it turns out is Mirith's, but they don't make it very far. The ship is damaged by the Xanabar chasing them. Nice to see that they aren't making things too easy for the good guys. We see, meanwhile, after Xandel's decision to disband the aliens on the council and arresting Fina, is warned that her father, Baron Diasta, will not be happy. You can infer that he's a powerful ally with the Crimson Council, and Xandel is risking a defection to the New Republic. Xandel along with his security are ambushed by the Black Sun, although they are thwarted, and one of the corpses shot was in fact a clone of Xandel himself. Yeah, the Black Sun were planning to replace Xandel right after their spy was captured. And so now Xandel and the remaining council know that someone is aiming to replace someone with a clone spy. Kanos and Mirith meanwhile flee from the crash site, and Kanos shows that he knows what he's doing as he saves Mirith again from a predator. When they go down to camp for the night, they have a genuine discussion about his allegiance to the Emperor, and this is perhaps the first time Kanos is fronted with his loyalty to the Emperor. Mirith remarks that Kanos and his resourcefulness reminds her of, well, her late husband, Jaren. A key motivation for Mirith joining the Rebel Alliance was because of the Emperor's tyranny concerning her world of Nez Perron. Her husband was elected as spokesperson for the farmers, and despite the rebellion rising, Nez Perron still aligned with the Empire. Basically, Nez Perron was a breadbasket for the Empire. But just like something like the Holodomor, the Empire neglected the world. Maximum work for minimum reward, in which the farmers were not allowed to keep their food at all and were left to starve. Kanos simply responds that it was a difficult time, and Palps did what he could to preserve the Empire. And Mirith angrily snaps back, showing a hologram of Darth Vader personally executing her husband, which I presume she carries around as a reminder. Vader in the hologram shows no care for the farmers as he's executing Jaren. Kanos, confronted by the information that Palps wasn't exactly the nicest guy in the world, falls back on the excuse that he does what he's trained to do. But Mirith responds that he should probably stop doing stuff based on what he's trained to do, and instead think about why he's doing something. And in a similar line to Shmi Skywalker, he should listen to what his heart tells him to do. Now this is the scene that absolutely grounds Kir Kanos as a character. Even though he's an anti-hero, he does have a concept of morality. His loyalty to the Emperor came first, but that was after hard training and conditioning. Still, he isn't completely brainwashed. He was brought in for training as an adult and knows enough to form his own opinion prior to that point. He has a sense of honor, twisted as it may be. He was taught to overlook the Empire's atrocities, or better yet, was never given any context for any potential missions. Now that the Emperor's dead and gone forever, his purpose is directionless. There's no longer an Emperor Palpatine to serve. He has actively been given the choice to be his own man. This, now that I think about it, might be one of my favorite moments in the Crimson Empire storyline. He does have the capacity for independence, but he has the choice to give up on his Royal Guard life. It's completely earned based on what was shown of the character. A relevant comparison of this being done poorly is perhaps the Star Wars Rebels character, Agent Kallus. Throughout the show, Kallus was shown as a ruthless, uncaring, sadistic ISB agent. In the pilot, he kicked a stormtrooper off to his death for making a joke. In the following episode after that, he gleefully gloated to Zed about participating in the genocide of his people. He's shown to be a general scumbag all around, and his only redeemable trait as a villain comes with his admiration for the rebels after they evaded him so many times. And that was actually subtle and cleverly written, a rarity in this show. But come the episode where Zeb and Callus share an escape pod and crash land on a moon of Geonosis, Zeb decides not to seize the opportunity to execute him because, quote, I want to finish our fight fair and square. And then throughout the course of the episode, it turns out Callus wasn't such a bad guy. Apparently, he defeated the Lasat warrior and took his bow rifle fair and square. They also try to frame his following of orders as, I didn't ask questions. And apparently this is an excuse for him to start critically thinking about why he serves the Empire after this. Bullshit! Callus knew in the pilot that the rebels were after enslaved Wookiees that the Empire put in shackles. He knew exactly what was going on, but he turned a blind eye because he chose to. He didn't value Wookiees as sentient. After all, freedom is the right of all sentient beings, as Optimus Prime would say. So this not questioning and not being told certain stuff is bullshit. Also, as an ISB agent, I imagine he would be prone to even more context than the average Imperial. He would obviously know enough to know that the Empire is evil, but he chose to stay loyal. I also found it laughable that he had the gall to ask Zeb when he says that not all Lasats are the same, that wouldn't the same standard apply to Imperials, where Callus showed no regard for those under him. Again, he kicked a stormtrooper off to his death over a joke. With Kir Kanos, his loyalty was after hard conditioning, and his potential redemption comes after the Emperor is dead and gone. Plus the fact that he has to work independently and think for himself now that he doesn't have an Emperor Palpatine to serve. That allowed him the capacity to think about what he's doing and why. Also, unlike Callus, Kanos shows no sadistic pleasure in the terrible things he's done. In case you guys don't remember, the moment he became an Imperial Royal Guard, he killed his close friend, and he expressed regret for doing so. Callus, not so much. Ever. I mean, after all, he almost bragged about having a bow rifle after genociding the Lasats. You see how one works and the other doesn't? There was no gradual process with Callus. He just ends up helping the rebels as a spy afterwards. Not earned in the slightest. If you've seen my Rebels Season 2 review, or hell, even seen the show yourself, you know what I'm talking about. In the morning, Mirith wakes up without Kanos around. She does shortly after find him, and Kanos remarks that their campsite was chosen because it is of a high elevation, aka easier to see in the dark. We get a little bit of banter about how now that it's daytime, it looks like they camped near an ancient temple, looking as if it predates the Old Republic possibly. There's even an interesting detail that the statues are of humans, not Xanabar ironically. But then who else would show up but the Xanabar? That's the cliffhanger leading into issue 5. But just like Dutch Vanderland, Kanos always has a goddamn plan. Turns out he called in an ally piloting an X-Wing. This mysterious ally goes in, guns blazing with the X-Wing swooping in, taking out the cannibalistic savages. Turns out that Kanos' mentor, Ved Kanend, seen in the flashbacks of Crimson Empire 1, has a son known as Tav, and basically he and Kanos are good friends. Tav bails out Mirith, but unfortunately, Kanos is unable to grab on and is forced to stay behind. He gives Tav the go-ahead to leave him, and it's him against the Xanabar alone. Despite Mirith's plea to help Kanos, Tav responds that he has his orders, so Kanos has been outmatched now. It's worth noting that Kanos was not invincible despite his skill. If he meets an equal, or an overwhelming yet skilled force, he can be defeated. Khan or Jax, for example, I'd say was his equal in the climax of the first third of the storyline. So I'm thankful to say that unlike Ahsoka, Kanos is reasonably defeatable under the right circumstances. Cut back to the Crimson Council, in which the remaining council members discuss the recent happenings. Xandel, it seems, is holding on to power, and the other council members discuss trying to get him to see reason after his drastic actions, such as taking the Baron's daughter prisoner, but as it turns out, Xandel approaches them first, and unapologetically and quite bluntly announces his disbanding of the council. He will rule the Empire alone. What a dickhead. Still though, it contributes to him being an effective, hateable villain. The fact that he now isn't feeling like sharing power. And now you're just waiting for this guy's greed to catch up with him. We see meanwhile that Grappa the Hutt is struggling with hiding the fact that he just killed Makis. Because when the Black Sun contact him, demanding he return, Grappa has to make up a story about how he's getting ready to return, but Grappa soon learned that the plot to replace Zandel failed hard. Because now the Imperials know about the plot. Grappa cuts transmission, and he starts stressing out. Especially when he learns that Makis' body is quickly deteriorating, with his neck misplaced. The Xanabar show up with Kir Kanos captured, and they want Grappa to trade in with the Empire concerning the bounty with Kanos. The downside is that Grappa only gets 10% of the profits from the bounty, although his pirate buddy reminds him that the 10% is still a lot. Just like in KOTOR 2, I still am curious on how much the bounty is. Things are starting to break down for the villains, and another mistake is enough to take them down. I noticed that a lot of hateable villains actually do lose stuff before their ultimate demise. For example, going back to Jang, he lost his whole team after the Marbles game, and being the coward that he is, come glass stepping stones, he tries to get the other remaining players to jump before him, not after. And this bad luck leads to his ultimate demise. As mentioned before, when his ex-lover tricks him, grips him, and causes them both to plummet to the ground. Both Zandel and Grappa are struggling to keep things together on their respective sides. Anyways, Tav introduces himself to Mirith back at a New Republic base or transport. Whatever. It's the same information seen before. Tav, like Kanos, realizes that the Empire he served no longer exists. As well as this, Mirith is informed that Kanos' whole plan was to pose as a bounty hunter Keenock's kill, to build a reputation to be hired by the Council to kill Kanos, hopefully getting him close to them, in which he could wipe them all out. Clever. Although Kanos abandoned the plan when Mirith came into the picture, as he told Tav that he owed her a favor, referring to the accidental death of Sadid. The two also talk about how they can piece together that the Black Sun replaced Fina Diasta with a clone on the Council. This is all before they go on a mission to attack a certain target, whom we'll find out what it is soon after. Meanwhile, we see Zandel, relaxing and lazy as ever. Despite being warned of the Baron's threat to withdraw after the imprisonment of his daughter, Zandel arrogantly refuses his demands, and shuts down the Admiral who gave him his warning, looking bored if anything. The scumbag is then approached by Nominor, who now feels like he's pulled one over, as arrogantly as he ignored the Admiral's warning. He proclaims to Nominor that now that he's in charge of the Empire, he doesn't need him anymore. Although he's cut off from a recommunication with the Admiral, being informed of Grappa's offer to trade in the bounty for Kir Kanos, although Grappa's not doing much better. He stages a false flag assassination of Makis, detonating his ship, presumably with his corpse in it, so that Grappa can tell the Black Sun that he was killed in an attack. Unfortunately for him, he doesn't get to tell Asib this. In the page previous, we saw an X-Wing squadron with both Mirith and Tav open fire on what else but the Black Sun cloning facility. As such, Grappa is informed of this, and Asib demands Makis return to him, but as it turns out, Mirith, Tav, and friends show up, holding Grappa at gunpoint, and demand Kanos back alive, along with the original Fina Diasta. Grappa, having no other choice, lets both of them go. Kanos remarks that they risk too much trying to free him, but Mirith simply responds that he's not the only one who understands loyalty, and then Grappa is then thrown in the cell. Grappa protests that they had a deal, but as Mirith points out, she mirrors his words to Massimo that if he betrayed the Black Sun, he would absolutely betray the New Republic as well. And that, my friends, is what we call poetic justice. In a similar turn of events, Zandel and the Crimson Empire is being bombarded with the ultra-furious Baron Diasta, who is out for Zandel's head. So Zandel, in a predictable turn of events, cries like a baby and asks Nominor if he's around for help, but he's not. And we all know why. A fate well deserved for a villain so slimy. And thus we get the cliffhanger leading into issue 6. Council of Blood shares the length of the first Crimson Empire, so we're nearly 66% of the way through.
Ironic.
Zandel, being the coward that he is, decides to give in to the Baron's demands and agrees to give the Baron what he wants, his daughter back. Although it's clear that Zandel only cares about taking the risk to save his own skin, as he pretty much indicates to the Admiral that his troops will perish. The Baron meanwhile remarks that of course Zandel would do this, but nonetheless he accepts his offer. Meanwhile, after Grappa is left out of his cell, in which he gives the servant who let him out no form of thanks, Ulasib catches onto his deception as he's already been informed that he killed Agent Marcus, and also about Grappa's plan to sell Kir Kanos to the Empire for the bounty. He doesn't want to hear any excuse Grappa is gonna cock up, so he ends communications. Meanwhile, above Ord Cantrell, the clone of Fina is returned to her father, and the Baron is completely satisfied. Right until some New Republic blokes show up, and it's here where the Baron has brought his real daughter. Surprisingly, the Baron isn't as surprised as I could imagine he could be. Mirith explains that 4 years ago, the Black Sun and Grappa kidnapped his real daughter and replaced her with a clone. And shortly after this, the clone confesses to being a cheap knockoff, but tries to argue that she's still of the Baron's bloodline, just as pure as the original. Kanos, however, is quick to have his blade by her throat, and he brings the Baron up to speed, and he is super ready to execute her for her part in the Emperor's final death. Although Mirith is there to discourage Kanos, arguing that it should be up to the Baron to decide what to do with his daughter's clone. Technically also his daughter, and Kanos is later shown to stay his hand. And again, it's earned. We see meanwhile that Grappa is confronted by the Xanabars, demanding the reward money. Grappa is forced to explain that Kanos is no longer captive, and tries to talk off the Xanabars, trying to pass off his failure as, that's life. And you can probably tell what's gonna happen to him. Meanwhile, Zandel accepts an audience with the Baron. He now expresses confidence that he will control the Empire. That is until Nominor pops up for the last time, informing him that Kir Kanos is coming with the Baron. Zandel's sweating intensifies, but tries to keep his cool when the Baron comes in with Kanos, Mirith, and Tav, in which the Baron reveals that he knows about the conspiracy against Emperor Palpatine. Zandel is also deflected with the Baron's revelation that his daughter was replaced by a clone. Zandel tries to get the guards, and Kanos shows up in all his glory, ready to execute Zandel for his treachery. And Zandel's guard is ineffective against Kanos. Tav does get shot, but survives, telling Kanos to serve justice against Zandel. When Zandel is at Kanos' mercy, he shows how shallow he is, by offering anything in exchange for his life, to which Kanos slams him on the wall. He announces loudly for his part in the betrayal of Palps, the penalty is death. And Zandel is no more, as Kanos executes him. Just like I said before, the satisfying punishment for Zandel makes for an elevated climax. Kanos ultimately decides, though, not to execute every member of the council, staying his hand for once. We also see the Baron think to himself how much he understands Kanos' desire for revenge, but imagines Grappa getting away and hiding someplace safe. Although we see meanwhile that Grappa is actually in chains, prepared for a Xanabar sacrifice to make up for the reward he denied them. Satisfying as hell once again. The story wraps up with Mirith offering the Baron a place in the New Republic, but for the meantime, he declines, preferring to govern his own territory independently. Tav tells Kanos that his assistance is always there should he request it, and then we get Kanos and Mirith. I wanted to note here that Mirith at this point has fallen in love with Kanos. That's part of why Kanos reminded her of her late husband. She tries to offer Kanos the chance to settle down with her before kissing him. Kanos ultimately declines this offer, stating that he knows that her heart belongs to the New Republic, and his allegiance belongs to the Emperor, as he flies away in his X-Wing, ending Crimson Empire 2, Council of Blood. Man, what a Chad. He rejects the easy life because he's the man, and he chooses to continue his service to the Emperor posthumously. Now, after Crimson Empire 2, the final entry in the trilogy wouldn't come until ironically 13 years later, where Crimson Empire 2 came out shortly before The Phantom Menace. In fact, the last issue came out the month before The Phantom Menace made its theatrical release in May. From what I hear, the third entry in the Crimson Empire trilogy was shelved for the longest time. It was supposed to come out in 2002 or 2003, but it was canned. Then, at Star Wars Celebration 5 in 2010, they finally announced that Crimson Empire 3, Empire Lost, was going to come out in 2011 with its first issue, and conclude in 2012. And that's right before the acquisition. So as one of the last expanded universe comics, let's see if Empire Lost was worth the delay. I may be reading it back to back, but still. Before we get to the main event though, it's worth talking about the two prelude comics that promoted Crimson Empire 3. The first is a Dark Horse extra short story called Hard Currency, which doesn't include much. It's just Massimo, who survived the Xanabars out for revenge against Kanos, although he ultimately fails in his attempt, with Kanos proclaiming that this is all about honor. Not much to say here. This was just a short story concerning Massimo's short-lived revenge plot. The real prelude of notice is called The Third Time Pays for All, in which a guy is being pursued by Kanos over a bounty. Kanos ruthlessly knocks him out, remarking that he talks too much, and we get some self-narration. He speaks to Mirith across the stars, and swears he will finish the Emperor's final vengeance, and that goes to the ones present for Palpatine's final death. That includes Luke Skywalker and Leia Organa Solo, whom the whole galaxy know at this point are the kids of Darth Vader. Yeah, unlike Disney canon, the revelation that Luke and Leia were the children of Vader didn't cause any ruckus, because it was a non-issue. Both had proven their allegiances were to the rebellion, now the New Republic. This is a great way to anticipate Crimson Empire 3. Kanos will either have to try and hunt down both Luke and Leia, or give up in the attempt. And to the end of the trilogy, Kanos will probably have one final chance to choose his ultimate path. It's here where Kanos brings his bounty to the guys who will pay him, and upon learning the guy was wanted for the murder of 14 children, Kanos decides to execute his bounty and accept the prize for him dead at a lesser reward, just because his sense of justice kicked in. We cut to Mirith looking out a balcony on Coruscant, and we learn that she is part of Leia's personal guard, although the thoughts of Kanos distract her. She realizes that she has foiled her chance to do her duty and kill Kanos, and remarks if there's a third time they meet, she will not hesitate, although it's been around 2 years. I like this little prelude, because it sets up the story that's to come. I may as well call it Crimson Empire 3 Issue 0. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's get into the complete Crimson Empire 3 Empire Lost storyline. Again, I'll say that the death of Khan or Jax was very much a mistake, and they failed to come up with a villain or threat to top him after that. So that's my main criticism throughout all this. Anyways, the start of Empire Lost shows a New Republic fleet stepping right into a trap and being targeted by an Imperial planetary base. This sort of reminded me about how Crimson Empire 2 started, except instead of being captured by pirates, the victims in this case die horribly. This planetary base will be important for later. We cut to Kanos, straight off executing the child killer, taking the lesser reward, and leaving. He plans to go to his room at a primitive motel or something, in which he's informed by an alien dude that there's 4 guys waiting for him in his room. With that warning ahead of time, Kanos proceeds to beat the shit out of the intruders, killing 2 of them, until a certain bounty hunter goes to cease the violence, asking Kanos nicely to put down his weapon. You want to know who it is? Why yes, it's none other than Bobby Fett. Kanos decides that he's killed enough people today and lays down his arms as Bobby escorts him into his ship. And in case you don't know, the third entry features a bunch of legacy characters actually. We also see meanwhile that the young trio of Han and Leia's children sneak around past their bedtime while Leia's doing politics, and they distract her in the middle of the whole thing. Shortly after, Mirith comes in, wanting to resign from her position as key head of security, but Leia doesn't let her. We also get a bit of Luke Skywalker on Yavin 4, in the middle of training his students, and after the lesson's over, Luke talks with Vima Deboda, remember her? Who tells him that the New Republic is about to face another threat, and that he must warn his sister about a man named Devian, who Who's that?
Oh, you'll find out.
That's where we cut back to Bobby Fett escorting Kanos to a hidden Imperial base, in which the guy there welcomes him personally to the heart of the restored Empire, ending issue 1. So yeah, issue 1 is filled with legacy character appearances, but still, it's sufficient setup for what's to come. We see that the New Republic is about to encounter another damn threat, and this restored Empire Kanos is meeting is heavily indicated as being that. It's enough to get you to buy the next issue. Anyways, come the next issue, we see these mysterious black armored warriors break into a toxic weapons dump and steal a rare material known as Zinethium, and bailing out with the material. Meanwhile, Kanos is escorted across the base and given his own quarters, being asked to meet the rest of the command later at a banquet. Inside, he finds what else but Imperial Guard robes. The dude who escorted him then heads over to the leader, Deviant, who right off the bat, you can tell is the villain based on how he looks. His scarred face and the fact that he's missing an eye tells you that he's been through a lot of shit, and probably done a lot of terrible things. The dude alludes to some secret plan, and expresses a desire to eliminate his enemies, and prop up the true Empire. Meanwhile, we see Gilead, Paleon, and Fina Diasta talk about a potential treaty with the New Republic. As I remember, Paleon is the guy who is giving up the war effort in favor for peace. The Imperial victory was sort of out of the question post the death of Grand Admiral Thrawn. So this part suggests that peace is now a possibility between both sides. The war has been going on for over a decade, and people are getting sick of it. Elsewhere, we see Nom and Nor from earlier being delivered the stolen material. I believe there was a description somewhere that identified this guy as an agent of the Yuzong Vong. Just thought I'd mention this part, because then we cut to Mirith on patrol at Leia's estate, in which he sees one of Leia's Noghri bodyguards dead, and shortly after, saves Leia and her children from the assassins. She again pushes her desire to resign from her position. Anyways, Deviant and the rest of the restored Empire greets Kanos as their guest as he walks in with his royal guard robes, giving us the cliffhanger for issue 3. Now you probably realize I didn't have much to say, and that's mostly because the first 2 issues are mostly setup. There wasn't that much to talk about review-wise. I guess I could minorly criticize that it takes some time for Empire Lost to get going, but I wouldn't say it's significantly weaker for it. Anyways, moving on to issue 3, we also get the appearance of General Han Solo doing some cleanup work on some random planet. He's shortly after contacted by Leia, who catches him up to speed on the attack she and their kids had to deal with. I guess the one bit of characterization we get is that Han shows his love for Leia and his children. Thanks, Legends, for giving us a timeline where he doesn't, quote, father an incest child. Because let's be real, Ben Solo is really Luke and Leia's son. Anyways, Kanos is given the utmost respect by all the Imperials there, and Deviant pretty much gives them the offer to join their cause, because their loyalty is to Palpatine posthumously. However, Kanos tells Deviant to his face that he knows about him, about his ruthlessness and brutality to a severe extent, and how he does not trust him. We see an officer cut in, excited at the prospect that Kanos will join them, until he's brushed off. Kanos remarks about how disrespectful it was to do that, and Deviant shows how low of a person he is. When he gives Kanos a demonstration, having one of his best men spar against him, but then commits the villain kills his own men cliche by executing his warrior, simply because he made the mistake of directly striking at him. Even Kanos points out how much of a foolish waste this was. And I guess this is meant to show Deviant's brutal nature, but I think there was a better way to go about this, because Deviant even remarks that the dude he killed was one of his best men. So what gives? He didn't exactly do this out of arrogance or to intimidate others, so this is a poor case of the villain kills his own men cliche. And it's here where Deviant takes Kanos across the base, and explains that he, along with the restored Empire, plan to mutually wipe out Admiral Paleon, seeing him as weak, as well as the New Republic, by attacking their capital of Coruscant, at the government center. When Kanos asks if innocents will die, Deviant will remark that it is merely a byproduct of war. This here is where Kanos makes up his mind if he hasn't already. He downright refuses to join the restored Empire. He tells Deviant that he was utterly brutal, enjoying the pain he inflicted upon others, and his recent actions prove that he has not changed. So his answer is a flat out no. He will not join his restored empire. And it's here where Kanos' role as an anti-hero becomes evident. I mentioned that he finds no pleasure in the terrible things he's done. And this here is why he doesn't like Devian. Because he's the opposite when it comes to serving the Emperor. He's sadistic and he enjoys his work. While Kanos does it because he was conditioned to. And he at least does not enjoy it. But did it because his loyalty to the Emperor was absolute. Then he gives Devian the classic line of, "We are not the same." And Devian, treacherous as ever, decides that if Kanos won't join him, he's to be locked up. Although quickly after detaining him, he realizes his blaster was stolen. And he realizes Kanos must have stolen it. So yeah, Devian has an iffy start. Although he is effective at presenting himself as the villain. They make it clear why he's the villain, and it works. Anyways, cut back to Mirith interrogating a suspect on the attack on Leia, who is called back by Fina Diasta through the hologram. She tells Mirith and Leia about Paleon's proposed truce with the New Republic, although Leia is hesitant, as she suspects he was behind the attack on herself and her kids. Soon afterwards, Luke arrives at Coruscant, and tells Leia that he knows who the suspect being questioned earlier answers to. It's Devian. We see meanwhile that Kanos detonates his stolen blaster in order to escape, and he beats the shit out of the stormtroopers, and forces a dude to walk him to a loading dock, and lets him off after he does so, and uses the shuttle to escape. Now you might be wondering how that was too easy, but it turns out that Devian allowed him to escape, and this was part of his entire plan. He knows that Kanos is going straight to Coruscant, as the only person he cares about resides there. I'm presuming the shuttle is rigged, and Devian is confident that the New Republic is doomed. So yeah, Kanos fell right for a trap. I might have had my problems with Devian, but this isn't actually a bad plan. Not exactly foolproof, but I can buy that someone like Devian would come up with something like this. This is the cliffhanger for the next issue, issue 4. In the next issue, we see Han be called back to Coruscant. And on Coruscant itself, Kanos makes an unscheduled dock, in which New Republic troops have him at gunpoint. They don't listen to his request to see Mirith sin, so he's forced to surrender. We see meanwhile that Luke, Leia and Mirith talk about the peace offer. Leia has warmed up to the idea, sick of all the conflict, although Luke doesn't trust Mirith completely, as Fina Diasta's father was a proud supporter of the Empire. Mirith angrily walks out, and right afterwards, Leia is contacted by one of the guards by the docking ramp, and she finds out immediately that Kir Kanos has arrived. We then cut to Devian ready with his fleet to engage a New Republic ship that's coming after them, before they attack the New Republic itself. I do have to say that the threat is increasing. You can piece together that Devian's plan, and it does feel like there's a rush against the clock, especially as the next cut takes us to Mirith seeing Kanos, who is detained. He explains that he comes with a warning, that Devian plans to destroy the entire New Republic. It may be a similar threat seen in Jedi Outcast or Jedi Academy, but the threat level is nonetheless the same. The momentum is here, as Kanos explains everything, and Mirith only agrees to listen to him if he swears that he's given up his oath to avenge the Emperor. We see afterwards that the New Republic ship approaches Devian's base and is ambushed, but manages to survive, and announces they're going to send down troops to investigate. Kanos explains his case to Luke and Leia, telling them that the oath he swore is dead because the reasons behind it are gone. So there, he's allowed to leave Coruscant, as Mirith goes with him to confront Devian. Although they find out shortly after that the transport Kanos arrived in is rigged, and so Luke risks his life to bring the shuttle into orbit and then eject himself. He of course announces his survival to Leia, who initially thought he died, and that's the ambush by Devian thwarted. We see meanwhile that Kanos and Mirith go to a world completely far away from Coruscant to meet up with Fina. Although shortly into the meeting, Devian's men show up to ambush them, and they are repelled, but unfortunately, Fina herself died. Either that, or it was her clone, but that's besides the point. Anyways, with that being said, we see Devian, ruthless as ever, about to self-destruct his own base, leaving behind a small force to guard it. Now I'd say this is more iffy as a villain kills his own man cliche moment. He's not killing these guys for failure or for petty reasons like that. He's doing it because he believes it's a necessary sacrifice to assert the restored empire as the dominant power in the galaxy. Still though, it further shows us his ruthlessness. The entire base gets destroyed, as Devian and his goons are ready to jump into hyperspace. We see across the New Republic and Palion's Imperial Remnant, the death of Fina Diasta was bad news. The remainder of the issue has Kanos and Mirith talk to the Baron personally, as Devian is right about to attack Admiral Palion and his Imperial Remnant, ending issue 5. Now I know I haven't done a lot of describing about what I like and dislike about this story, but rest assured, it's solid. I would say I prefer the first and second Crimson Empire, and I still think Devian isn't as defined as a villain as Khan or Jax. The momentum and pacing is pretty good, and I think things are progressing naturally. Although, the death of Khan or Jax is still a criticism, as we don't even need to deal with the council he created anymore in Empire Lost. And Devian doesn't really challenge the heroes at all besides from, I want to destroy the New Republic. It's not much personally is what I mean. So come the next issue, Devian presses his attack on Palion, and he even barges into his meeting place and has him captured, although he's interrupted by the Baron, revealing that the attempt on his daughter actually failed because he actually has one more. Ha! Called it. But point is, things are starting to fall apart for Devian, especially as Kanos pursues him, and they have that final confrontation, with some more awesome comic book action, although Devian is ultimately defeated, as Kanos is able to get a hit on him, remarking that he forgot Vader's important lesson: never stop fighting until your opponent is dead. Despite this, Kanos is heavily wounded, but he makes his recovery. The storyline is wrapped up with the restored Empire thwarted. Mirith has to lie to her superiors that Kanos is dead as she finally resigns, while Kanos himself is thanked by the Baron, whose clone daughter will replace his original one, and they close the story, with Kanos flying off, his arc completed. And that is the Crimson Empire trilogy. I may have been greatly summarizing stuff by the end, but it's detailed enough that you know what happened, even if you haven't read the comic yourself. Now for my final thoughts. I have to say that Crimson Empire is pretty damn good. It's a straight continuation of Dark Empire told from the perspective of a royal guard. His pursuit for vengeance in the first 2/3 was really compelling, and his drive away from that was earned and well written. Although my main criticism was the missed potential of Khan or Jax, who gets killed off at the end of the first third, and they're unable to come up with a villain or threat to top him. That's not to say they had bad villains as follow-ups, it's just that Khan or Jax was the peak villain of this trilogy. However, I'd say I'd give Crimson Empire an 8.5 out of 10. Great storyline, albeit hampered with the early death of a villain with potential. Still, I enjoyed the whole thing. The spin-off stories were mostly good too. And Crimson Empire did have a sense of finality in relation to Kir Kanos, although I wouldn't be surprised to see him in the future had the expanded universe continued. But in a way, a character like Kir Kanos was never ruined, so that's the good thing. So yeah, that's my complete review of Crimson Empire. I liked it. I'd say Tales of the Jedi or Dark Empire was better, but that's not to discount Crimson Empire as a story. So in my follow-up videos, I plan to do the following, including Rebels Season 3 and a bunch of other projects, but Rebels Season 3 will be my main priority as I get it done before Ahsoka's final episode comes out alongside Season 4. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?
Under the mountain.